Can one dig deep enough into the corners of a crippled mind to free it from the clutches of an unforeseen evil? Mia and Gavin are driving up to visit the home of their new film's subject. Lewis, their cameraman, is taking a video of them. The group is warmly welcomed by Sarah, the daughter of the house owner. To ease some of the tension from being filmed, Mia jokes that Sarah simply needs to ignore the other two guys. Gavin and Lewis do not appreciate the sentiment. Sarah says that while her mom may come off a little annoyed, she has been preparing the house excitedly for their group. She also gives the group some pointers to make her mom more welcoming. Somewhere in the forest, the group finds Deborah, the mom, and Harris raking away some of the fallen leaves. Sarah reminds her mom about the movie that the group plans on making about her. Deborah claims that while she can appreciate the educational value the film might have, she does not want to be made a laughingstock afterward. Mia shares that her grandfather had the same disease that Deborah has. She also assures her that this is not just another school project for her to make a grade. Deborah walks away and says that she isn't the right subject for their film. While their hosts are away, Gavin confronts Mia about her sick grandfather, who is apparently on vacation in New Zealand. Mia says that she simply said all that to nudge Deborah in the right direction. From behind the window panes, Deborah and Sarah talk about their financial issues. Deborah must help Mia's group to make the film in order to save their house. Sarah says she also wants to help her mother with the money they will be getting. The two share a long embrace as they both now agree on what must be done. A week later, Mia's team revisits the property. Deborah is more welcoming of them as she tours them around the house. They see the painting room, where Deborah paints birds on the walls. They see Sarah's childhood room and her love for baseball. Gavin and Lewis are brought to their room and Mia gets her own. Mia's room is ornate and filled with small memorabilia from Germany. When asked if she has ever gone, Deborah says she hasn't. Sarah tries to remind her mom that she has been to Germany. Mia is making a film about Alzheimer's and its effects on the people concerned. She tells her audience about how the disease could result in one's passing. As Deborah tries to get Sarah to remove her military-looking jacket, they are brought in front of the camera. Deborah tells the group about her daily life as a person with Alzheimer's. Sarah tells them how the disease might be genetic. Dr. Nazir, the film's medical interviewee, says that Deborah is suffering from mild cognitive impairment. She says that Deborah won't be going down easily. Mia narrates about how Deborah lost her husband, and how the mother was able to provide for her family as a switchboard operator. Deborah claims to have been the nexus of the town, being the primary conduit for all information. Deborah tries to live a normal life, even while struggling with the disease. She goes to flower shops and cooks for the household. Her friends and family do show much concern, but as they say, Deborah is a fighter. Deborah does what's possible to fight off the disease, knowing full well that there is no cure for it. Lewis takes a video of Deborah working on her garden. As Deborah pulls out a slithering snake from the ground, Mia storms in and scolds Lewis for not working on their film. Lewis sets up cameras across the house as Deborah idles about the halls, observing. Later that night, Mia checks up on Sarah. Mia warns Sarah that the stress may be too much. As Sarah explains that it was no major concern, Deborah screams at Gavin downstairs. Deborah points a knife at Gavin. As she clatters about the kitchen, she demands Gavin to show her where he took her spade. Sarah tries to calm everyone down, and Mia's team goes around searching for the spade. Lewis retrieves keys to check out the locked attic, and finds Deborah's old switchboard surrounded by other dusty objects. Shortly, Mia comes around and produces the spade she found inside the freezer. Downstairs, Sarah is trying to calm her mother. Deborah stares outside, muttering as she turns around. Fingernails have dug into her slightly bloodied neck. At the hospital, Dr. Nazir tells Sarah that the disease has spread and that Deborah's time has been cut shorter. She prescribes Sarah with medication and mood stabilizers. On their drive home, Deborah apologizes to Gavin for her outburst. The team considers bringing Deborah to a nursing home. Harris disagrees heavily. He says that a nursing home isn't a place to live at all. Inside the house, Deborah sits to paint. In one of her paintings, however, standing behind the silhouettes of the forest trees, stands a shadowed figure. Lewis wanders about the house and hears Deborah talking to someone behind a closed door. He opens the door and sees Deborah talking in a mirror. She tells something to stop, and then sees Lewis in the reflection. Lewis takes down the camera. Mia makes a comparison between Deborah's situation and the switchboard she operated. She loses connection, just like how she pulled the wires from her devices back then. Sarah has begun to take to drinking to cope. She calls her girlfriend, Shelley, over the phone, trying to comfort her. The team joins Sarah in her drinking. Sarah shares how she was sent to boarding school when she was a 10-year-old, following an innocent intimate exchange with her childhood friend. Sarah shows Lewis a picture of her boarding school days. She has never been fond of dresses, and she hated the boarding school uniforms. Upstairs, something falls. Concerned, Sarah runs up to check on Deborah. Lewis hears something across the room. He sees Deborah in a white dress pass across the hall. He follows her into a room, and she stands in front of the window. Convinced that someone, or something, is outside, Deborah nails the window shut. Sarah doesn't argue. In the bedroom upstairs, Deborah is tucked into a comforter and sleeps peacefully. Seconds later, she is jolted awake and leaves the bed. Then, she disappears. The morning after, the team and Sarah panic as they try to find where Deborah went off to. Lewis finds one of the windows open, a window that Deborah had nailed down previously. They find a dirty white dress on the ground outside. They run out into the forest in the hopes of finding Deborah. In the forest, the group find Deborah digging her spade furiously into the ground. They try to recover her, but she is in a frenzy. Eventually, they manage to calm her down. Back at the house, Mia tries to clean Deborah's bloodied hands. Deborah stares at Mia menacingly as she does. Gavin reviews footage from their experience last night. He tells their group that, other than the escape to the forest, Deborah was acting weird in the kitchen too. Without a break in the video, Deborah manages to leap onto the kitchen counter from the floor. Harris confronts Sarah about the film team, asking to have Deborah take a break. Sarah tries to reason that they need the money, but considers Harris's point. Later, Sarah scolds Deborah for the events last night. Deborah brushes it all off and tells her daughter to just go back to Richmond to be with her girlfriend. Mia's team prepares for Deborah's interview. Deborah hums a happy tune in her white dress. Gavin says something nice as he puts a microphone into the dress. Sarah shows Deborah the footage from last night. Deborah doesn't remember anything and is frustrated, asking why they didn't stop her. Shortly, Deborah tackles Gavin onto the ground. The two are separated, and Deborah collapses onto the ground sobbing. Deborah is taken to the hospital, where they extract some fluids from her spine. They also observe that the skin on her back has developed a scaly quality. None of the doctors can explain it. As Dr. Nazar tries to take tests, Deborah peels away at the skin on. The doctors restrict her immediately as she growls hysterically. Dr. Nazar concludes that something else other than Alzheimer's is happening to Deborah. Mia's team arrives at the house and spots a car in hazard mode. Inside, they hear Deborah growling in a room, and they rush to the door. They find Sarah and Harris restraining Deborah as they try to take out one of the miniatures from Deborah's mouth. The following day, Sarah and Mia's team package the miniatures to keep Deborah from hurting anymore. As they move boxes around, Sarah and Lewis find a snake slithering about the boxes. Later, Gavin fools around and tries to leave a cross on one of the windows. He finds a cluster of painting sketches of the windowsill under a cloth. The same drawing of the shadowy figure approaches the window. Gavin proceeds to hang his cross on a nail of the windowsill. Then, out of nowhere, Deborah appears standing in the corner of the room. The once nailed-down window flings open as Gavin runs out. Gavin reports the incident to Mia and demands a higher pay rate if he is expected to stay on. Lewis demands the same, and Mia is forced to concede. Deborah wakes from her sleep and, with her clothes slipping off, walks into another room. The team wakes up to the loud sound of a telephone ringing. The lights don't turn on. Sarah wakes up and tells them that the ringing is coming from Deborah's old switchboard. She goes to check on Deborah and discovers that her mother isn't in her room. A door slams shut, shocking the group. Fortunately, the door isn't locked as Sarah leads them inside. Hearing scratching behind the closet doors, they walk up to it, only to find that Deborah isn't in there. They hear a thud in another room, which Sarah says is never open. Sarah instructs Lewis to go in first. Lewis sees Deborah operating the switchboard. As she flicks through the channels, she mutters for someone to help her. She collapses onto the table briefly. Then, in a growling voice, Deborah screams at the switchboard, calling it an ugly thing. Spouting gibberish, Deborah pulls at the wires, and the device short-circuits. Mia tells her team to call Dr. Nazar. Dr. Nazar checks on Deborah, who struggles to breathe. After calming her down, Dr. Nazar hands Sarah a sedative. The group checks on the switchboard and discovers that Deborah was trying to call someone. Sarah accepts that maybe she must reactivate a certain memory for her mom to find peace. The morning after, Gavin adjusts some audio taken from the night's footage. He finds that the gibberish that Deborah was screaming that night refers to an eternal serpent who wants Deborah to be its fifth. Sarah confronts Harris about the night's events. Harris blames Mia's team for the stress that Deborah is feeling. He offers to sell his tractor, among other things, so that Sarah doesn't have to deal with the film crew anymore. Sarah brings the team to where Deborah's switchboard contacts are kept. They find that one page is missing from the files. Lewis requests some charcoal and paper to take an etching of the missing page. The team discovers that the contact on the missing page belongs to Henry Desjardins, a pediatrician suspected of murdering 4 young girls. They refer to a documentary of the murders and learn that the victims were carved with snakes and potentially poisoned with snake venom. They also learn of the Monocan rituals that took young girls to feed a snake god for their immortality. Desjardins is suspected of having performed the same ritual, lacking just one more victim to truly complete it. The following day, Sarah asks Deborah about Desjardins over breakfast. Deborah remembers his name, but not why she does so. Sarah says that Desjardins may have disappeared over the years. To the group's surprise, Deborah shatters the mystery behind Desjardins' disappearance and says that the man passed away. Sarah asks how Deborah knows that. Her mother says that the man was murdered. Having said that, Deborah quickly stands up and rushes to the bathroom. Sarah follows her. Mia and her team try to help, but Sarah rushes out of the bathroom to call an ambulance. Deborah lays on the floor with a spray of blood across her face, teeming with earthworms. Deborah is brought to the hospital again. A doctor assisting Dr. Nazar claims that Deborah is suffering from a split personality disorder. The assisting doctor guesses that Deborah has been eating soil. Sarah contests this and storms out of the room. Even Harris comes to visit, but is immediately restrained by the nurses. Mia digs up an article about Harris. She suspects that maybe Harris got rid of Desjardins to protect the other girls, and that maybe Deborah is keeping his acts secret. As the team struggles to agree on things, a loud bang is heard from outside. It is Harris shooting at the house and the team's minivan. Gavin calls the police. The police arrive at the house and arrest a drunken Harris. Sheriff Tweed interviews Sarah about her mom's condition. The following morning, Gavin leaves the team behind. Mia and Lewis discover that Deborah has disappeared from the hospital. The hospital's security camera footage shows that Deborah has taken a young girl with her to the lower floors of the building. The hospital staff move across the rooms. Dr. Nazar finds Deborah in a room with the child. She retrieves the child carefully. Deborah is taken back to her room and is restrained. Deborah screams and sobs as she wrestles with her mind. Sarah confers with a priest and considers an exorcism. The priest tries to reason that Deborah is simply struggling with her mental health problems. Sarah, however, is convinced that this is something else. Mia tells Sarah that she has contacted Dr. Skiffer, the anthropologist from the Desjardins documentary, to get information. They give him a visit and have him watch their team's footage. The anthropologist assumes that Deborah has become obsessed with Desjardins and is simply trying to mimic him. Sarah demands further explanation, believing that it is way more than just an obsession. Dr. Skiffer shares with the group the concept of vengeful entities that invade weak minds such as Deborah. He recalls a similar story when he was living among the Bantu tribe. He tells them that a witch doctor had come to save a woman suffering the similar fate as Deborah. At the hospital, Harris visits Deborah and removes her restraints. She holds him in her arms and whispers for him to. Harris is hesitant, but chooses to respect his dear friend's wishes. Harris grabs a pillow and smothers Deborah with it. For a moment, Deborah struggles against it. The room shakes vigorously with otherworldly energy. Then the wall-mounted television flings itself at Harris. The day after, Sarah storms into Harris's room. Harris struggles to breathe as he tells Sarah about how her mom was behind Desjardins' disappearance. He says that Desjardins takes his victims to the Monocan mine, and that Sarah was meant to be the fifth victim. It was Deborah who saved her from that fate. He tells them that Desjardins was in the backyard, just below a certain statue. Sarah runs into the forest and tries to dig under the statue, 4 feet deep, and they find nothing. They almost give up until Sarah bangs her shovel on something metallic, a dirty spade. Sarah rushes into the house after realizing that Deborah may have gotten to Desjardins' body before them. They search the house for any place that Deborah may have kept him. They find the doorway to the third attic, with its entrance stained by a human-sized blotch. Lewis is told to go up first. Lewis shines a light across the attic and finds goop dripping from the rafters. Sarah finds a rucksack wedged into the insulator foam and pulls it out. A stench clouds up the attic as they open it. Inside, they find the skeleton of none other than Desjardins. Sarah remembers Dr. Skiffer's story about burning the body of the thing causing the curse. They ready the fireplace, but stop when they hear a hissing noise coming from inside the rucksack. Mia lifts the rucksack, finds a cluster of snakes slithering about underneath, and panics. With Mia screaming, Sarah takes control of the situation and tells them to focus on burning the body. They toss the rucksack into the fireplace and struggle to light a fire. They manage to ignite it, but an unseen force blasts them outside of the house. As they turn to the window, a figure stares them down. They quickly run to the backyard. Sarah receives a call from the hospital, telling her that Deborah has broken free from her restraints again. Sarah retrieves Desjardins' remains before they drive to the hospital. Arriving at the hospital, Dr. Nazar tries to calm Sarah down. She explains that a security guard has gone into anaphylactic shock after being poisoned with snake venom. Security footage shows Deborah roaming the hospital grounds again with a young girl. A security guard tries to block her way. Deborah lunges at his neck and bites down. Moments later, the security guard is on the floor, paralyzed. Sarah waits in the parking lot for the Sheriff Tweed. She explains that Deborah is heading to Monocan Mine. Mia readies the syringes that Dr. Nazar gave them. The team finds an abandoned Corolla just in front of the mountain road. A fellow officer suggests that they go down the mountain trail to catch Deborah off guard. Eventually, Sheriff Tweed and the team catch up to them. They try to get Deborah's attention as they approach. Cara, the young girl, tries to stop them, saying that the man is a nice man again and again. Sheriff Tweed puts handcuffs on Deborah, and the latter spits at the other officer. Deborah darts off into the darkness. Mia tells Lewis to help bring the injured officer down the mountain. Mia will be carrying the camera from here on in. Mia, Sarah, and Sheriff Tweed run up the dark mountain. They pass the River Rouge from the documentary and arrive at the opening of the Monocan mines. A trail of bloody footprints leads into it. Sheriff Tweed assures Sarah that whatever it is that took the girl is not her mom. Mia admits to Sarah that she lied about her grandfather suffering the same disease that Deborah has. Sarah doesn't care and simply tells her to own up to the circumstances. They go deeper into the mill. With light in hand, Sarah finds Sheriff Tweed lying still on the dusty floor, a snake writhing near her. Some distance away, Deborah growls and runs deeper into the shadows. Sarah calls to her as Mia chases after them. Their flashlight begins to falter and, ultimately, turns off. Cara screams again and again. Mia panics, and Sarah hands her another light. When Mia switches it on, Sarah has disappeared. Mia follows Cara screaming, and eventually rejoins Sarah. Sarah finds a tight crevice infested with snakes. She knows that Cara was dragged in there, and that Mia needs to calm down. They go over their plan to sedate Deborah and burn Desjardins' remains. They must turn off the flashlight so that Deborah doesn't see them come in. In night mode, Mia films them approaching an unsuspecting Deborah. As Deborah places a large snake, Sarah readies to plunge a sedative into her. Deborah quickly turns around, fully aware of her daughter's presence. She pushes her down onto the dirt and takes a her hand. Sarah manages to push her mother off. Deborah darts deeper into the shadows, taking Kara with her. Sarah takes a gun out of her backpack. She aims at the shadows, expecting something to jump out at her. They arrive at a deeper chamber. Sarah knows that her mom is behind one of the stalagmites. She calls out to Deborah, telling her that she is coming closer. Sarah sees Kara's head. Sarah fires her gun once and stops Deborah from. With Kara free from her mom's clutches, Sarah tries to convince Deborah to fight Desjardins' curse. Sarah plunges the sedative into Deborah's neck and slows her down. Sarah takes out the rucksack containing Desjardins' remains. Mia remembers how they tried this and failed. Sarah is convinced that this has to be done in the mines for it to work. With gasoline and a lighter in hand, Sarah successfully sets fire to the rucksack. The cave shakes as the evil spirit of Desjardins roars into non-existence. Deborah regains consciousness and sobs into her daughter's arms. The newscast reports Deborah to be a suspected kidnapper and murderer. With her rapidly deteriorating state, she is unable to stand trial. Kara, however, heals from her cancer and celebrates her 10th birthday. When she is interviewed about her life plans, she simply looks deep into the camera. Smiling, she says that it will remain a secret for now.